The Bitter Taste of Marriage. The Stranger I Met, Episode 14. Written by Eberichukwu. And then I remembered what the small boy had told me at the bus stand. My heart began to pound as I whispered a silent prayer under my breath. With measured steps, I approached James cautiously. "What is the rope for? My dear husband, has it gotten to this?" I asked, my voice trembling but careful not to spark his anger. He didn't utter a word. He just stood there, his eyes glassy, his lips pressed tightly as though holding back a storm of words. There was a strange calmness about him, a calmness that was uneasy, almost frightening. He struggled to speak but nothing came out. When he finally dropped the rope on the bed and turned to leave, I quickly snatched it, ran outside, and hid it under the staircase before returning to the room. My heart raced as I came back up to find him wandering aimlessly through the house like a lost spirit. His silence unsettled me. I could not yet piece together his intentions, but my mind screamed one possibility: suicide. Perhaps he was not fully convinced, but something dark was brewing. He was cold, not violent, just cold. He refused to say a single word. I couldn't read his mind, but dread was rising in me like a tide. Unable to bear it, I rushed to involve my neighbors. By the time we returned to the house together, James was pacing the living room with a small clay pot in his hands. What is all this?" I screamed before I could stop myself. James' eyes flickered with shock. Perhaps he thought I had gone out. My neighbors rushed forward, dragging the pot from his hands. He shouted suddenly, "Women should not touch the pot. If they do, their menses will stop forever." The neighbors froze, staring at him with wide eyes. The air was thick with confusion and disbelief, but also caution. "This is juju. Ooh. This is juju," I cried. My voice cracked as I turned to him. "James. First it was a rope, now a clay pot. What is happening?" James sank into a chair, his body trembling, his eyes dull with exhaustion. "I went to see a herbalist," he finally said, his voice low but steady, "to know the exact cause of the constant pressure and problems in my family, especially between me and my wife." The neighbors gasped quietly. My knees felt weak. "The rope," I whispered. He avoided my eyes, his voice faltering. The suicide thought came when I realized. He stopped abruptly, his lips sealed. He cleared his throat and continued. "The pot was meant to cushion the negative energy in this house, to stop the constant quarrels in my family. I need my wife to obey my instructions and do exactly as I say." I cut him off sharply. "How can I do exactly as you say, even if it's wrong?" "James, you are unbelievable." My voice echoed off the walls. But inside, fear was gnawing at my soul. He had started visiting black altars and shrines. Who knew what would come next? My life and my children's lives felt like they were hanging on a thread. I hurried into my room, trembling, and dropped my luggage. In a panic, I packed a few of my clothes and some of my children's belongings, ready to leave the house entirely. My neighbors stopped me. They pleaded with me, speaking at length, urging me to stay back and observe him so he wouldn't harm himself. What if he harms me? I asked, my voice breaking. They convinced me to stay, suggesting I could sleep at one of my immediate neighbors' houses rather than leaving completely. I reluctantly agreed, remembering the warning from the small boy at the bus park. When I returned to my house, James was sitting helplessly at the dining table. I pretended not to notice his mood. I prepared food for him but kept a close eye on his every move. Later, my children returned from school, surprised to see me home. I hadn't told them when I'd be back. They were happy, their chatter filling the house as they told me about their school days and how their father had questioned them with unusual kindness. I smiled, but inside I was still apprehensive. I didn't tell them what had happened. Night crept in. After preparing a sumptuous dinner, I watched my only daughter dance joyfully around the house as James sang songs praising her name. But my heart would not rest. I could not sleep. I pretended to study, my eyes darting toward James as he moved about. He had begun bringing strange objects from black shrines into my home. What would be next? While dressing my bed that night, my hand brushed against something under the sheets, a tiny object like a snail shell, tied with a thin black rope. My blood ran cold. Summoning every ounce of courage, I brought out my olive oil, poured it over the object, whispered a short prayer, and sealed it inside a waterproof bag before hiding it in my handbag. By morning, I gathered the family for prayers. James came out looking surprised, his face stiff. Even as we prayed, I noticed his eyes scanning the room nervously. Suddenly, he rushed into my bedroom. Quietly, I tiptoed behind him. He lifted my pillow, looked around quickly, then left. I slipped back to the sitting room, still singing worship songs as though nothing had happened. He returned to the prayers, trying to read my expression. But I danced and clapped harder, my smile hiding the storm in my heart. My children stared at me, puzzled, especially Solomon, who seemed to be reading the tension silently. After prayers, I helped them prepare for school, served their breakfast, and watched them leave. As I was dressing for work, James came into my room. "Did you see my wallet?" he asked, staring straight into my eyes. "Your wallet? Inside my room. Where exactly did you keep it?" I asked. "Under your pillow," he said. I smiled faintly. No. I did not see any wallet, but I saw a tiny dead creature. His eyes widened. "Oh. It's meant to be inside my wallet. Maybe it dropped out." His voice had a sharp edge of panic. "James, what is a dead creature doing in your wallet? Is your wallet a burial ground?" I snapped. "Please, give it to me," he said quietly. "Give you what exactly?" I demanded. He softened his voice further. "Please, Kindly give me the object. What is it for? I pressed. He hesitated, then whispered, it is for my business. I brought it so it can help elevate my business. I stared at him, my anger rising again. James, what business does your business have with my room, my pillow, precisely? I didn't put it under your pillow, he said quickly. I just suspected it, it's there. What for? I shouted. He began to pace, his voice ragged. Just give it to me. But by then, I had already finished preparing for work. I suspected he was waiting for me to pick up my bag so he could snatch it from me. He didn't know I had secretly taken my bag to my neighbor's house. Calmly, I stepped out of my room. I want to buy a pen at the shop downstairs, I said lightly. He believed me. After all, I hadn't carried my bag. But the next thing he heard was my car engine starting. He rushed out, but I was already driving away. From a safe distance, I called my neighbor to check on the house. She told me he had rushed out too, locked the house, and driven off. Later, I learned he had come to the school where I teach, looking for me. But I had already instructed the gate man to tell him I hadn't come in. My car was parked 3 houses before the school. He left and went straight to my parents' house. He didn't find me. He called my line severally, but I didn't pick up. After school, I drove straight to my spiritual director. I handed him the object. He examined it carefully, smiled faintly, prayed over it, and then said in a low voice, "This object was brought to make you." The spiritual director turned the strange object in his hand, his eyes narrowing as though he could see beyond its surface. He smiled faintly again, but there was something unsettling in the calmness of his expression. "This object was brought to make you a prisoner in your own marriage," he said slowly, every word deliberate. "It was designed to weaken your will, to bind your spirit, and to make you submit to every command, whether right or wrong. Your husband was instructed to hide it in the very place where you lay your head, so that, while you slept, your spirit would bow to his." I gasped, covering my mouth with trembling fingers. My knees almost gave way, but I held onto the chair before me. The spiritual director continued, "Had you ignored it, over time you would have found yourself losing your strength, your sense of self, your voice. You would have become like a shadow, alive, but without power. You would obey without question, even against your own convictions. That was the assignment of this object." I felt chills run down my spine. My mind raced back to the rope, the clay pot, the dead creature tied with black string. All of it was connected. "Father, what if I hadn't found it?" I asked in a shaky voice. He looked at me gravely. "You would not have known what was happening to you until it was too late. That is why God opened your eyes and gave you the courage to act. The enemy always operates in secrecy, but light exposes darkness." Tears welled in my eyes. "But James, my husband, how could he?" The spiritual director sighed deeply. He is a man drowning in confusion, running to dark altars for answers instead of light. He thinks these things will solve his problems, but they will only destroy his soul, and those around him, if he does not stop. He sprinkled holy water on the object, prayed with authority, and then dropped it into a fireproof bowl. As the flame caught, a foul stench filled the air. The thing shriveled, crackled, and turned into ash. "This covenant is broken," the priest declared. "But you must remain vigilant. Do not fear him, but do not be careless either. Evil often fights harder when it is losing its grip." I left his office both relieved and terrified. My relief came from knowing the object was destroyed. My terror came from knowing James would eventually realize it was gone. What would he do then? That evening, I returned home. James was waiting at the door, his face stern, his eyes searching. "Where is it?" he demanded as soon as I stepped inside. I pretended not to understand. "Where is what?" I asked, brushing past him with my bag. His voice grew louder. "You know what I'm talking about. Where is the object you found?" My heart pounded in my chest, but I forced a calm smile. "James, I don't know what you mean. All I know is that I serve a God who reveals secrets and protects his children. Whatever evil you're bringing into this house will not stand." His hands shook with rage, but something in my confidence made him hesitate. For the first time, he looked afraid, not of me, but of something greater. That night, I couldn't close my eyes. I lay awake, listening to every sound, watching every shadow. I held my children close, my ears alert, my heart crying silently to God, "Lord, how long will this battle last?" I knew the fight was not yet over. James had touched powers he could not control, and sooner or later, there would be another confrontation. James stood in the middle of the sitting room, his fists clenched, his chest rising and falling with fury. His eyes darted about as though searching for something invisible. "You took it," he said finally, his voice low and dangerous. "Don't lie to me. You took it." I stood my ground. "James, whatever you are talking about, I don't have it." He stepped closer, his face inches from mine. "Do you think you can play games with me? Do you know what that object was? Do you know what will happen now that it is gone?" His words were like fire, but there was a quiver in his voice, a trembling fear behind the rage. My children, sensing the rising storm, peeped from behind the doorway. I quickly signaled them to return to their rooms. My heart thudded painfully in my chest, but I kept my face steady. "James," I said firmly, "I don't know what you brought into this house, but I will not allow darkness to destroy my family." He froze, staring at me as if trying to read my soul. For a long moment, the room was silent, only the ticking of the wall clock filling the air. Then, suddenly, James laughed, an empty, hollow laugh that sent chills down my spine. "You think you're strong because you prayed over it," he said, shaking his head slowly. You don't understand. These things, they don't just vanish. Someone will have to pay the price. My stomach twisted. What do you mean by that? I whispered, though part of me didn't want to know the answer. He didn't respond directly. Instead, he paced the room, muttering words under his breath I couldn't understand. Then he stopped abruptly, turned to me with eyes that looked almost inhuman, and said in a voice barely above a whisper, "Tonight, you will see." Before I could speak, he snatched his car keys from the table and stormed out of the house, slamming the door so hard that the walls trembled. The sound of his car engine roared into the night, fading into the distance. I stood frozen, my hands shaking, my lips dry. My children crept back into the sitting room, their eyes wide with fear. "Mummy," Solomon whispered, "what did Daddy mean by tonight?" I swallowed hard, forcing a weak smile for their sake, but inside my heart screamed. I had no answer. Only dread. That night, after tucking the children into bed, I sat by the window, staring into the darkness. Every sound outside, every dog bark, every passing vehicle, made me jump. My mind replayed his words again and again. "Tonight, you will see." And as the clock struck midnight, a strange knock echoed at the door. Episode 15 loading.